Are you looking to run your own security guard training school? Check out guardcardtraining.com. We have state-approved security guard training materials, professionally printed and bound student manuals, PowerPoint presentations, knowledge checks, and final exams. Everything you need to run your own program. Just open the box and start teaching. guardcardtraining.com.
This is Clay from Skilled Gentleman Podcast. You're listening to the Security Professionals Podcast with Alex Haddix.
Welcome back. And once again, we have Doc Wesson with us to once again talk about Kevlar vests. The episodes that we ran with him were so popular and they generated so many questions about Kevlar that we had to bring Doc back a third time. So welcome back, Doc.
Oh, thank you, Alex. Third time's a charm.
Absolutely. So yeah, it was just it was a really popular episode, and the amount of interest that it generated. I mean, I knew it was going to be an interesting topic, but the amount of comments that we received in email, you got personal messages, we got messages and lots of posts to the Gun Rights Radio Network message boards, and we got a lot of posts to the Facebook page. So
exactly. So
there were a lot of things that came up, things that we stressed during it that I think may have been overstressed. Mm-hmm. And so what I'd like to do is, take the time and run some clarifications and answer some of these questions.
Well, we'll do the best we can.
So let's start with the first one, which I think was one of the biggest ones, is the episode that we ran. People got the impression that Kevlar was fragile because of what we were talking about with the wicking and the water and the manufacturing process. But based on our discussions afterwards, Kevlar's not that fragile. Could you go into a little more detail about that?
Yeah, it's not. You've got to remember when I'm talking about it, I'm really talking about it from a manufacturing type standpoint, and from the I guess the scientific standpoint of it. Obviously anything that you put out in the sun eventually will degrade. It's with moisture, with sunlight. Kevlar will do that, but it's very simple. In the way you take care of it is you treat it with a chemical to keep the moisture off of it, and then you wrap it basically in what would be equivalent to like an airtight bag, which would be some type of nylon or something to that nature that actually does fairly good in sunlight, maybe a polyester bag or something like that. So if you're actually looking to a vest, you'll see that the panels are actually inside, encapsulated in a material, which is a fabric that's been sewn into basically a bag to fit those panels in. Now, I'll give you an example. I actually produced a bag out of Kevlar and basically encapsulated it with monolithic film. And what I mean by that is it's not film that has any type of perforations or any type of way or entry for water or gas to go in and out. It's basically a monolith. It's one structure. And we, produce that, and it actually is being used underwater in the ocean. So it's not, I think I pushed that part so much just based on the fact that, yes, you want to try to take care of it, but you want to try to take care of everything. And let's face it, this stuff is going to be there to help you when you're getting shot at. But, Kevlar is an amazing, amazing fiber. And it's really rugged when you look at it in the right way. You just have to kind of protect it.
Okay. And the fact that it has, under combat conditions, been used for, decades now.
Yes.
And has a proven record as being reliable and, working really, really well and protecting and saving lives.
Absolutely.
Under combat conditions for a long time. So it is more durable than I think our initial discussion made it out to be.
Quite correct. Basically, if you were to actually take just a piece of Kevlar that's not treated, the fabric, lay it out in the sun, eventually you'll see that it does start to change. But then so does anything else, when it weathers, so to speak. But no, this is protected, and it's the measures that are taken in the processing and putting this thing together, like the vests, helmets, etc., take into account for the moisture to where literally it does, that moisture really doesn't have that much of a chance with it. But, but again, heat, anything like that is an energy, and it does tend to work on things. But it's not like it's going to be, tomorrow or next week. They put these, I guess, quote unquote type shelf lives on these vests. They're not a year, so it's just, you want to take the same precautions you would with basically anything. But it's a very robust system. It is a very robust system.
Excellent. Now, the next biggest question that we had was about who should I buy my vest from? What is a good vest to buy? And I know you cannot answer that.
Right.
So, but I just wanted to address the fact that you work in the research and development and manufacturing process and cannot go on in any particular vendor, despite the fact that half the questions are, who should I buy from? Yeah,
we got a lot of that. I can recommend that you go out and look, at people that actually retail and sell these things. What we do is when we produce them, we actually make the fabric, and we will treat the fabric depending on what type of treatment and what end use it's going to be going into. And then, of course, we sell that material to a manufacturer, say like Point Blank, what they'll end up, or MSA, for instance. And those are two really big guys. What they'll do in turn is, I guess, potentially sell that themselves or sell it to a retailer type. I know, like, for instance, Galls, I think, sells, Police One is another place. I don't have any type of, dealings with those folks at all. What I was trying to get across was just, make sure that you see a name as far as manufacturing on the tag goes that you're familiar with. Like, Point Blank, any of those. You can go on Google and actually look up, body armor manufacturers, and they'll give you a list of it. And I just did it, and there's a number of websites that come up, and I'm looking at just a few of them, and it lists MSA, Armor Express, Point Blank, all U.S. Armor, a lot of the big guys, and those are the guys you kind of want to see. It's more important that's the point, is the manufacturer of how they put it together, because it's the quality control that you want to deal with. And as far as the retailer goes, I don't know really anything about cost wise or how the best area to go to look for the type of vests or whatever. There's so many different, there's of course the smock, and then there's the vests for different levels and whatnot that are done by the manufacturers. I don't know that they're all sold at the same retailers. But once again, if you go and type in Google, retailers, there's a whole host of them that pop up. And typically, if you go to that site, you'll go back and see that they're actually touting these manufacturers of the vests. So, I wish I knew more about the retailers, but I really don't. I really don't. I'm not on that end of it.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, a lot of times, like Galls doesn't actually make their vests.
Exactly.
They relabel another manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of possibility that, there may be 16 manufacturers or 16 retailers or brands, but there could only be like a handful of actual manufacturers producing the actual product, and they're just relabeled.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. So once again, we were talking about it earlier. They changed all of the requirements. The NIJ, National Institute of Justice, changed the parameters and the specifications to get the threat levels. And in doing that, they increased the testing, and the testing became so expensive, it in essence ran out the people that were putting vests together that were quote unquote the little guys. And so, you really now you've got the majority of it, overwhelming majority is the big players in vest manufacturing now.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, I think it's a good thing.
And that is exactly what they were after.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
and I really hate the fact that they knocked out the little guys, because I love small businesses, and being
mm-hmm.
a small business owner, that's the lifeblood of the country. But sometimes some things need to be handled by the big guys with the amazing and very strict quality control that a small person just can't do.
And and this is a prime example of one of the best reasons, actually. And you say you like the little guy in little business. Government loves the little business. minority owned, small businesses, they love it. And that's why there were originally so many of them out there doing that. So, now though there's changes, and like I say, it's basically run them out to the point where you've got, the majority of what's left over are the big guys.
So here's a question that was posted to the Facebook page, and it comes from Sean. And he asks, how long can you reasonably expect a vest to last, and how would you be able to tell if it was no longer reliable?
Well, once again, it depends on how are you using the vest. Has it been shot? Number one. Number two, have you been taking reasonable care of it? Coming from just the material standpoint of it, I do know that they will tout with vests, they'll tout a number of years that they recommend, I guess, again, calling it basically like a shelf life of it. I would go by those guidelines.
Do they come with a stamp of an expiration date?
I think they probably have. And again, I don't know the legal part of that from the vest folks. I don't know exactly how they handle that. I do know that, I guess the general outlook of that, depending on what it's made for, can be like somewhere between 5 and 10 years, just depending on what it is. But again, I can't be held to that because they're basically like guidelines, I guess. And as a matter of fact, in the same vein, I had someone pose a question to me, via email that kind of falls along the same lines that said, well, okay, would a vest that's out of date be better than not having a vest? And what a good question. And I'm thinking, so you've got a vest that you can get like maybe dirt cheap compared to a new one, obviously. Would you want to buy that and wear that, obsolete, spent vest, so to speak, versus not having one at all? So would it be better just to buy something instead of having nothing? And, I don't know, obviously. I can tell you this. Anything between you and that bullet is going to be good, And I would say that, it wouldn't hurt. I'm not saying everybody go run out and buy a vest or something that, has been obsolete, that's been spent or used. And, say law enforcement had it. Now they're just selling them. And, I don't know if they come back, these people that retail sell those out, or if whoever sells them would say, with a caveat, hey, these are just for, novelty now. Don't use them. I don't know about that. But, honestly, a great big coat, is better, because you've heard stories about how like a 45 had got stopped by down coat. I mean, I've heard those stories in the past, whether they're true or not, I don't know. But the whole thing in a nutshell is, is it better? It's going to be better than having nothing between you. But, obviously I would prefer to have one that's within the dates, they're recommending. Because once a number of years goes by, it's just like anything. If you wear a shirt and the shirt's great and you take care of it, eventually the shirt starts getting tattered and get holes and problems with it, but it's nothing that you've really done other than just to wear it. So is there a true stamp date? I don't. As far as the materials go, no. Now, is there a stamp date that the vest manufacturers put on that? I don't know that they have a date that says do not go past this line. Maybe they have some type of guideline, I would imagine, that says, look, we don't recommend, or, something like that, because the liability there, I would imagine, would be enormous. But again, I can't speak for them. I can only just kind of give you basically what I feel from the science and materials part of it.
Speaking of the science and materials, and along the vein of that question, how fast is the degradation once it passes its expiration date? Does it turn to dust? Is it a slow degrading where the fibers start to decay in patches? Does the whole thing go as an entire layer? How fast does the reliability disappear once that expiration date has been met?
Well, that's hard to answer. And the reason I say that is, again, it depends on what the use of it was, how it was taken care of. Obviously, if you take a single layer of fabric, Kevlar fabric, and lay it out in the sun, it's going to, it's not going to be just a matter of hours or days. I've never really done that, so I don't know, exactly how long it would take. But I know I've had rolls of the material in areas kind of uncovered, and they're still there, and that's been years now.
So that's just in your lab environment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And again, we've had some that are near the dock that we hadn't set outside, but obviously that dock door comes open and closed, and it's remained, intact. Now, does that mean that the strength of it may have gone down? Yeah, it's very possible. I would imagine it has, but there again, we haven't measured it to find out. So I imagine there is something that will give you some type of information on how long it would be like that, but I'm not aware of anything like that.
And the problem is you can't really test it because the testing process destroys it.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So it's like, oh yeah, that would have worked, but now it won't. So
that's right.
Ooh, okay, I would have been all right, but yeah, well. A question from Charles on the Facebook page. He asks, what materials would you recommend avoiding and why? And how accurate are the DOJ specs?
What would I recommend avoiding?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, anything that's not. Let me just put it this way. The first thing I recommend is distance. Don't get anywhere near anything that's going to be shooting at you.
Well, I'm thinking that because we talked about other fibers for a while as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay. Let's just take that as examples. There's fibers called like Dyneema is another one. Now, basically, that's not like a Kevlar. That's not the para-aramid. Dyneema is like an ultra high molecular weight polyethylene. Now, the claim for that, it's got lighter weight to it, different properties to it. They're strong. They're just as strong. And in some instances, depending on the thickness of the yarns or fibers, and they could be very, even stronger, depending on, the characteristics of how they've made it. But again, it's a different polymer than that of Kevlar. And I remember people saying, well, I've got this Dyneema thing that's been, as a security guard, or I remember reading on one of our forums, so Dyneema, man, tell me about Dyneema. And it's like, hey, it's good. Dyneema's good too. Also the way the fabric is produced, what we do woven materials, and they may be plain type weaves. There may be weaves that are very tight, some that are a little looser with coarser yarns in them or coarser filaments. Then there's others that are look similar to a twill type that increases strength as far as the fabric goes, but are heavier, not as flexible in some instances. Then there's another question that came up was, well, what about like something that's like gold shield? And okay, so here are aramid fabrics, and we may have touched on this, but they're unidirectional fabrics. And it's like, well, what is that? Well, when you weave a fabric, you have what's called a warp direction, which is basically these yarns come off of what was called a beam. It's just all these yarns are lined up side by side on this enormous beam that weighs thousands of pounds. And so you hook that to the front of a loom, and then these beams go through what we call heddles that actually create what's called a shed that opens and closes so that the yarn that comes across the width of it, which is called a pick, will go through that shed. In old days, you've heard of a shuttle loom or a shuttle, and it literally looks like a shuttle. What happens is the filament yarn would actually be in that projectile, and the projectile would be knocked from one side of the loom to the other side of the loom once the shed was opened with these heddles. So you've got half the yarns in a plain weave going up, half the yarns in the plain weave going down, and that's every other yarn that way. Did
they make you take knitting classes when you started
applying
for this job?
Stuff. Not knitting, not sewing. I mean, weaving.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
you got your PhD in chemistry, and all of a sudden you're talking about
polymer
shuttles
science.
and
polymer science. Well, and of course we weave. I mean, that's our business too, is to sell a lot of that woven materials. But so what happens, and nowadays it's different. They have what's called rapier looms and, air jet looms. Air jet's not typically used with these materials because they damage the yarns. And that's one thing you don't want. But like a rapier loom has a rapier, and you think of a rapier as a sword, for instance. It's very similar. It's a rod that shoots out, grabs this pick, which is the yarn that shoots across the width of it. And it literally grabs the end of it, goes halfway, and another rod on the other side comes out and grabs it and pulls it the rest of the way. All that happens within like a millisecond. And the shed will change. The yarns that were up will now be down, and the ones that are down will now be up. And so that's how you get that weave in a plain weave, for instance, where the yarns are going over and under and over and under and over and under. So that's a woven, plain woven fabric. Okay. And that's a lot of the majority of like the Kevlar fabrics are that way. And some of these, others like the Dyneema or Spectra. The unidirectional ones are not woven. What they are yarns that are laid side by side, and it's encompassed in a matrix of some type of resin system. That resin basically creates what looks like a ribbon. Of course, it's a ribbon, the width of, whatever your broad width is that you want. But again, the yarns are all laid out side by side, just, very evenly spaced out. Well, then what will happen is, to create the panel, they will come back and cut that as a sheet, so to speak, then turn it 90 degrees. And now you have yarns laying in one direction, and then 90 degrees, those same yarns, of a different sheet laying in the other direction. And you do that multiple times, and it creates a panel. Now, they say, well, what good is that? You've got a woven fabric, and then there's no buckle, there's no knuckle there where the yarn actually goes up and then goes down, because that leaves what's called interstices, which is a hole. So like if you take a T-shirt and you hold the T-shirt up to the light, you can see through it. Well, that's because you have holes in that fabric. And those holes are where the material, T-shirt's not a good example because it's a knit, but if you look through other woven materials, you'll actually see the holes, the interstices through that. The light comes through it, and that's where you're seeing that. Well, that's a weak point. That's a weak spot. And you're not allowing that fiber to do its job to protect there. So if you line them up, they're side by side, you've got even distribution of protection and strength with these fibers. So now the yarns and fibers are laid up at 90 degrees to each other. There's no knuckle there. There's no buckle and knuckle and crimp in this fiber. It's all straight, so you've got a lot more strength in that sense.
So it's laid out like plywood.
Yeah, that's a good example. When you have that, it may not be quite as flexible, but there again, you imparted a little better strength in it, which means that you can possibly use less, which will lower the weight, increase the strength of it by lowering the weight. So the flexibility kind of goes up anyway, because now you don't have, the added weight or, layers to it. So, I think Honeywell produces Gold Flex. Maybe it's Gold Flex, Gold Shield. And someone asked, well, what about that? I'm hearing this stuff. It's good. It's a good material too. And again, that material is produced by Honeywell, which is a big name, obviously. There has been talk in the industry that unidirectional is kind of the wave of the future, to a certain degree. So, I feel safe in that as well. And Alex, in regards to like the NIJ testing, what that is basically a specification. And I guess the question that you had posed from the listener that said, how accurate are they? Well, I mean, they're 100% accurate. They're 100% accurate in what they ask, because that's what these things do. That's what they ask you to meet a standard like this. So basically the threat level, for instance, and I don't have the charts in front of me, and so I'm going to just give out, just totally irrelevant numbers, but just to give you an example of the pattern. So like if you've got a projectile that weighs this much that's being shot at this speed, say let's pull up an arbitrary number of say 1,500 feet or 2,500 feet per second, for instance. Okay, 50% of those should be stopped and 50% can go through. Well, does that mean that you want it up to that point? No. What it means is it gives you a level to say you need to stay under. And so the question really isn't a question you can answer in the way I think they're asking it. They're asking it, how accurate is this material that you're putting out? You know, the NIJ is just asking you to meet a standard. So you could get like a vest that's rated to a level 2 or to a 3, whatever, 3A. And actually it perform over that. It's very possible.
So it's a minimum requirement.
Yeah.
And the way they set their tests up makes sense from a scientific perspective, but maybe not from a general usage perspective. It's like in the scientific process, the null hypothesis. And the whole point of your experiment is to disprove your null hypothesis, which sounds in a normal circumstance completely back-assward.
Right.
But from a scientific perspective and a testing perspective, it makes complete sense.
Right. You want to know where it fails. I mean, that's the most important thing, is to find out where it fails. Because if it stops, it stops the material there. So you want to go further than that. And you want to come up to the point where you can find a spot where basically 50% of the projectiles that are static at this point, we're talking about roughly the same speed, because you'll never get them exactly the same speed. It never does happen. And anybody should know that enjoys shooting firearms. But, 50% would go through and 50% would be stopped. And that gives you exactly where it's I guess the break point, so to speak. And so in essence, you're keeping under that, because obviously the further down in the threat itself, then the higher percentage you're going to get of it stopping. So, if you're asking for a question, if the listener or somebody else would be asking for a question, well, how do I know there's a guarantee that I'm getting, and this is what I think they're asking, that I'm getting a level 2 vest that is going to stop the threat level that it says it's going to stop? How do you, well, again, there's no guarantees. There's just no guarantees. You can say statistically across the whole life of the product, everything that's been tested, we've noticed, basically this is stopped with the threat that you're talking about. And that's why they put that out there, but again, there's other characters or other things that come into play, like angle of incidence. I mean, were you turned when you were shot? Was it a head-on shot? Again, you can't go, the imagination is truly the limit. I mean, it's just, you can't come up with every scenario and have an exacting measurement for it. It's just impossible to do it. That's why these things are never sold stating, okay, here's a vest. It will stop this no matter what. So if you wear this, you're A-okay. You just can't, there's no way to do that, because they're not bulletproof. They are bullet resistant. It's helping you out. It's helping you out. So, I know that's kind of a hard way to answer. It's really a hard question to answer in the way I'm pretty sure that was being asked. But the truth of the answer for the question is all the NIJ does is to produce a number, a metric that you can go by to try to make sure that it meets that metric. So the answer to the question truly is 100% accurate, because that's what they're asking you to do. Now, is the material that way? Well, that's up to the manufacturer, and of course the testing is being done for it.
Wow. So in a lab environment under specific conditions, yes. In real world, anything can happen.
Even in lab environments, sometimes, who knows? I mean, again, it's true. It's true. That's why, a V50, and again, that's the velocity where 50% go through and 50 don't. It can change from panel to panel. That's why they do multiple panels. That's why they do multiple shots. That's why you don't just shoot one panel one time and walk away and say you've got it. you got to have more data points, and it gives you a greater statistical average at that point, which of course, it opens up an enormous amount of other statistics that you can, apply to it. But again, there's no guarantees ever in anything. If you're standing with 10 inches of hardened metal between you and a 30-06, that's steel core that's being shot at you. How do you feel about that? Well, what if that metal's weak in a spot? You don't know. I mean, there's just so much involved. But the thing is, they wouldn't be selling and making these things the way they are. They've been used for, and proven in all types of adverse conditions. Our troops carry them. The police carry them. They're being sold. And, oddly enough, you would think with the nature of this stuff, the liability that's involved, there'd be just lawsuit upon lawsuit upon lawsuit. And there are some, but it's nothing like you could imagine. You've probably got just as many lawsuits based on airbags in cars, I would imagine, in certain circumstances. But this stuff has been out there. It works. And Kevlar is my favorite, I think, because I work the most with that. I'm most familiar with that. We have a good relationship with DuPont to where we work with them. And then, also it's been out there the longest. I mean, basically it's been out the longest and been used, in all types of theater and venue for, all types of different, law enforcement, like I say, military, in the civilian or contracting. So, it's good stuff. That's the stuff I'd want to have. Again, to sum up with a Dyneema and the others, great too. The Honeywell type stuff, I can't speak from the vest standpoint for any of that, but I can tell you the materials are good materials.
Okay, Doc, I appreciate you coming back. Now we've covered a couple additional topics here in depth, and they were representative of the whole host of questions because there was a lot of very similar themed type questions. So we picked a couple out and we covered them in detail. I hope we got them all answered. I think that we did. Mm-hmm. If we don't, send us more questions, guys. Doc would be more than happy to come on, right, Doc?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of setting you up there.
Yeah, I do. And again, I know that a lot of these, answers seem to be vague and may even create more questions in your head as to, well, wait a minute, do I really want this stuff? But the truth of the matter is, it's like I said before, you're looking at it as a resistance versus a being proof. And it's, obviously it wouldn't be made and sold in the way it's done if it didn't work. So it's just, this is just the science behind it. And, there's obvious liabilities and all. So you'll never find somebody that'll give you 100% guarantee on it. You just won't. But I'm hoping it did satiate some folks for the questions that they've got. Hopefully we didn't, or I didn't, because you did very well, but hopefully I didn't sprawl it out to the point where they're more confused now than they were. And hopefully folks will see that they can have a little more confidence. Yeah.
Well, I mean, bottom line, it's a lot better than your own hide.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, Doc. Well, thanks again for coming on. It's been wonderful chatting with you, and we look forward to having you on future shows.
Alex, I really do appreciate it, and thank you to the listeners for paying attention. I'm sorry if I rambled too much, but thanks to everybody. Thanks again, Alex.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Well, that will do it for this episode of the Security Professionals Podcast. If you have any tips you'd like to share with everyone, a comment on a show, or if you would like to suggest a topic for an upcoming episode, write into podcast@security-training-center.com. Or you can leave us a voicemail at 909-742-0649. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe.
When every moment matters and a life is saved, when someone gives blood, when a hand reaches out, that moment when heartbreak turns to hope, you're there through the American Red Cross. Down the street, across the country, around the world, you help save the day. every day. Your support truly matters. You can help today. Visit redcross.org.
The Security Professionals Podcast is copyright Security Training Center, LLC. This work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. An archive of previous episodes can be found at security-training-center.com/podcast.